This morning we are continuing our sermon series called Journey to Generosity, and during this series we are looking at the ways that we are meant to give of ourselves, our time, our talents, and our financial resources. At the end of this series, which will be next Sunday, we will come together and present our commitment cards, both our spiritual gifts commitment cards and our financial commitment cards to God. And I just need to remind you that if you did not receive a set of cards in the mail this past week, please see one of the ushers on the way out, and we will make sure that you get those so that you can also make your commitments to God next Sunday. Today we are talking about rendering that which belongs to Caesar, and that which belongs to God, to God. And so this morning I am reading from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 2 through 10. And this is the letter written by Paul to his protege Timothy. And I'm reading today from the paraphrase called The Message, starting with verse 2 in chapter 6. These are the things I want you to teach and preach. If you have leaders there who teach otherwise, who refuse the solid words of our Master Jesus and his godly instruction, tag them for what they are. Ignorant windbags who infect the air with germs of envy, controversy, bad-mouthing, suspicious rumors. Eventually, there's an epidemic of backstabbing, and truth is but a distant memory. They think religion is a way to make a fast buck. A devout life does bring wealth, but it's the rich simplicity of being yourself before God. Since we entered the world penniless and will leave it penniless, if we have bread on the table and shoes on our feet, that's enough. But if it's only money these leaders are after, they'll self-destruct in no time. Lust for money brings trouble, and nothing but trouble. Going down that path, some lose their footing in the faith completely and live to regret it bitterly after that. May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words. So there was an elderly man who was desperately ill, and he was very close to death. But he was so concerned about what was going to happen in the afterlife that he really wanted to be prepared. So he called his closest friends, his doctor, his pastor, and his business manager, and summoned them to his bedside. When they arrived, the old man said to them, I know that they say you can't take it with you, but who knows for sure? What if they're wrong? So I've asked you all here because you are my closest friends, and I want you to help me be prepared when I die. I'm going to give each of you an envelope, and in that envelope is $100,000. And I want you to promise that at the end of my funeral, you will put those envelopes in my jacket pocket. That way, if I need the money in the afterlife, I will be ready. Promise me that you'll do this. Well, his friends absolutely promised him that they would. Well, not long after that, the man died. And after his funeral, each of his friends was seen slipping an envelope into his jacket pocket as they approached the casket to pay their last respects. Well, after the service, while these three friends were visiting with each other, the doctor said with a rather sheepish look on his face, guys, I have a confession to make. I'm afraid I've done a bad thing. You know that the hospital where I work, where I practice, desperately needs a new CAT scan machine. And so I took $20,000 out of the envelope before slipping the rest of it back into our friend's pocket. But I did it for a good reason, to buy the hospital a new CAT scan. I'm sorry I didn't keep my promise. At that point, the minister cleared his throat and hung his head. He said, I too have a confession. As you know, our church is overburdened by the needs of the homeless. I just couldn't see putting all that money in a casket and burying it with our friend. So I took $50,000 in order to help the homeless. Then I put the rest of his money in his pocket. I'm sorry I didn't keep my promise. Well, upon hearing these confessions, the business manager exclaimed, I can't believe what I'm hearing. I am deeply disappointed that you would break a solemn trust. He was our friend, and you made a promise. Well, the other two looked at him and said, so you gave him back the full $100,000? And the business manager said, well, of course I did. I gave him my personal check for 100 grand. You know, my friends, the truth is that when it comes to our earthly possessions, including our money, we can't take it with us. Although there are some who keep trying to do that. In fact, some of us would say that our American attitude toward wealth is not only unhealthy, but it demonstrates a lack of concern and compassion for the needs of others. Some say that's a function of our American individualism, where the needs of the individual are more important than the needs of the collective body. But others say it's simply a function of greed. Regardless, the American attitude of money and our attitude about stuff in general can be detrimental to our well-being as individuals and as a society. In an article called Cultural Attitudes Toward Money, author Philippa Viola writes about different cultural attitudes toward money. She writes that in many Asian cultures, for example, they view money as a necessity for survival and not as an indicator of one's social status or as a requirement for overall happiness. Generally speaking, Asian culture values life balance far more than the collection of wealth. And to that end, their goal is to make just enough money to survive and enjoy collective family and societal goals. Likewise, in many European cultures, they believe money should be used to enrich one's social life. That it's better to work to live rather than live to work. And in the African culture, they believe money exists to benefit the entire community rather than the individual. So the more money that individuals make in the African culture, the more they can share with others in their community. And in some Middle Eastern cultures where the Muslim faith is predominant, the third pillar of Islam, called zakat, obligates them to donate their earnings over a certain amount to care for the needs of the poor. Keeping it for themselves simply is not an option. Giving it away is required. So how are we, as Americans and Christians, supposed to feel about money? Well, if we look at our New Testament scriptures, throughout the New Testament, we find plenty of passages meant to guide us in our relationship with money, like the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler, where Jesus tells him to sell everything he has, to give the proceeds to the poor, and then become a follower of Jesus. Follow me, Jesus says. Yeah, that didn't end well, did it? No. Or when Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Ouch. That hurts, doesn't it? Or when Jesus said just moments before that, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. Instead, store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, for where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Yes, Jesus said a lot about what our relationship with money should be like. But the way that he responded to the question about taxes was really pure genius, I think. He knew that they were trying to trick him. And he knew that if he said, yes, you must pay taxes to the Roman government, that those who were passionate about the resistance against Rome would be angry and hostile toward Jesus. But he also knew that if he said, no, you don't have to pay your taxes, that he would be arrested and tried for treason against Rome. Jesus was caught between the proverbial rock and hard place. But he knew how to get out of that. Instead, he says what no one expected him to say. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. Jesus isn't saying to the believers that they shouldn't pay their taxes, but he is saying that we shouldn't have to pay more than our fair share. And then the rest belongs to God. And when you think about it, Jesus' response makes perfect sense. It's important for us to pay taxes to the government, and it's important for us to support the ministries that God has ordained. Because when we do, we are making an investment in our world, both secular and sacred, the world in which we live, and the coming realm of God. Now, I know a lot of you out there are probably like me. You aren't very excited about paying taxes, right? But when we think about it, there are good reasons why we should need to pay our fair share. For example, our public schools are primarily funded through tax revenue. So if we want our children to have good schools, then we need to pay our taxes. Oh, but I don't have kids in school, some of you might be thinking. Well, and while that's true, even though your tax dollars aren't benefiting you and your children, they are benefiting the children that live in your community. And if we expect those children to become productive members of society when they grow up, then we all must contribute to their education. After all, it does take a village to raise a child, right? Our military is also funded by the money we pay in taxes. And in troubling times such as these, who doesn't want a strong military that is at the ready to be deployed? But there are even some things that are closer to home. For example, when we go home later today and we turn on our water faucets at our houses, we expect water to come out of them, don't we? Well, the infrastructure that is required in order for water to come out of those faucets, some of that is funded by our taxes. Same thing with the electricity that comes when we flip on our light switches. Our tax dollars are part of what pays for that infrastructure. And if we want good roads on which to drive our cars, and if we want police officers and firefighters who are there for us at a moment's notice, then we have to pay our taxes. Because in order to get the things that we want or the things that we need from our government, we have to pay our fair share of the cost. We have to pay our taxes. And the same is true for what we give to the church. As a congregation, we want a nice facility where we can worship God and be in fellowship with one another. We expect our sanctuary and our meeting places to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And yes, we even expect coffee and snacks during those times because, face it, we're Methodists and that's how we roll, right? We expect to have pastors who lead worship and deliver meaningful sermons, and musicians who share their talents and add a joyful noise to our worship experience. We expect people to be in the nursery caring for our babies, and Sunday school teachers who are teaching our children a good religious education. And when we're sick or we're grieving, we need advice or someone to talk to. We expect the church to be there. And all of those things require resources, time, talent, and money. And all of that comes when we share it with God through the gifts that we give to the church. So the taxes that we pay and the gifts that we give are investments in our world. They are investments that we hope will make life a little bit better for everyone, not just ourselves. And from that perspective, our taxes and our gifts to the church are very much the same. But in another way, they are very different. You know, when it comes to paying taxes, most of the time we pay whether we want to or not, right? I mean, often the tax is already built into the cost of the things that we buy at the stores. Or in the case of income tax, we pay our income tax bills because, face it, we really don't want to go to jail, right? So paying taxes for the most part is not an option. But when it comes to the gifts that we give to the church, the gifts that we give back to God, whether they consist of our time, our talent, or our money, we get to choose whether we give or not. And if we choose to give, we also get to choose how much we will give. Now, every year when we get to the end of our Form 1040, and y'all know what I'm talking about there, right? Uncle Sam tells us how much we are going to pay. But when we get to the end of the worship service, we don't tell you how much you're going to give. That decision is left up to each of us. Now, God does give us a guideline. It's called a tithe or a tenth. But again, we determine what that looks like. If we're talking about our income, our money, is it a tenth of our gross income or our net income? Well, that's what you get to choose. Or if it's a tenth of our time, are we talking about a normal work day, an 8-hour day, or a full 24-hour day? Again, we get to choose. We get to decide. And when we make those decisions, they are a reflection of our values, the priorities that we place on the work that God has called us to do through the work of the church. Now, we all know that there are many demands upon our time, and there are many ways that we can spend our time, talent, and treasure. We know that there are many entities, including the church, that make demands on us each and every day. But in the end, we get to decide, we get to choose how we will use our resources, and what we choose to spend them on says a lot about the values that we hold near and dear. If we value the things of the world, things like accumulation of wealth or prioritization of our own needs, then we will spend our time and our talent and our resources on the things that are of this world. Treasure on earth. But if we are motivated by the values that God holds dear, unconditional love, compassion, and care for others, then we will spend our time, our talent, and our resources on the things that are of God. Treasure in heaven. Will the love of money dictate how much or how little we will give to God's realm? Or will God's priorities be our guide. The choice is yours. Because after all, you can't take it with you. Amen.